On this Tuesday night, fighting to phase out fossil fuels. Critics accuse leaders at COP28 of copping out.
Our leaders keep on destroying our planet.
I talked to a Canadian climate scientist who says not all hope is lost.
We can't do this alone, but I know that we can do it together.
Canada votes to demand an Israeli ceasefire in Gaza.
Hostages must be released immediately. Civilians must be protected.
As the campaign to free hostages heads to Ottawa.
Could I have my boy back?
And busted how smugglers tried to hide several tons of cocaine from the cops.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Pressure is mounting on Israel for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. More than 3/4 of the 193-member UN General Assembly, including Canada, voted today to stop the bombardment, though the resolution is non-binding and the U.S., Israel's biggest ally, voted against it. Canada, Australia and New Zealand signed a joint statement today saying the price of defeating Hamas cannot be the continuous suffering of Palestinian civilians. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he spoke with Israel's Prime Minister today.
We are committed to working with partners in the region and around the world towards an enduring two-state solution.
With the future of Israelis and Palestinians in mind, Canada is joining the international call for a humanitarian ceasefire.
Canada had until now been careful not to use the word ceasefire. Israel's ambassador to Canada calls today's change in tone disappointing.
I think that it has changed for the worse in Israel's eyes, because calling for a ceasefire in a situation that Israel is forced into a war actually does not strengthen us. As I said, it emboldens the terrorists.
The heads of several of the world's largest humanitarian organizations say they have seen nothing like Israel's siege on Gaza. In a guest essay published in the New York Times, they write the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th were unconscionable and depraved. But the right to self-defense does not and cannot require unleashing this humanitarian nightmare. If this relentless bombardment and siege continues, they write, there will be no day after for Gaza. It will be too late. Hundreds of thousands of lives hang in the balance today, they say, and in no other war we can think of in this century have civilians been so trapped without any avenue or option to escape, to save themselves and their children. And today, President Biden warned Israel's leaders they are losing international support for the war. Crystal Goomansingh has our top story tonight.
The comforting embrace between a mother and child. In every corner of Gaza, there is destruction and devastation.
We are living through this dystopian reality that excludes Palestinians from the most basic rights afforded to all human beings.
The Palestinian foreign minister raised what he called an utter international failure the week the UN marks 75 years since adopting the Declaration of Human Rights. Water, food, adequate shelter. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society says needs are staggering.
Like even a bread, it just became a dream to have a bread for your family, for your children.
I've never seen something like this in my life.
The World Health Organization, along with the local Red Crescent, were in Gaza City Saturday to move seriously injured patients south. The WHO's Gaza envoy expressed frustration with delays, mistreatment of staff by Israeli forces, and searches, even of patients in ambulances. The Red Crescent is building a field hospital in Rafah and hopes to have the new 50-bed ICU up and running in a week's time.
Unfortunately, those who are injured are going to lose their life if they are not going to get urgent medical services. But this is the catastrophic situation that all the people in Gaza are living in many areas.
Israel's ambassador to the United Nations says it's in the process of opening another crossing to process aid trucks, which also carry medical supplies.
One still needs to make sure, of course, that the humanitarian assistance actually reaches the civilians and not the Hamas terrorists.
Without a permanent ceasefire, aid groups admit there's little they can do. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, fearing his country's fight against Russia is being forgotten, was in Washington today, making an urgent plea for more military aid. Zelenskyy met with U.S. lawmakers, including President Biden. An aid package that includes money for Ukraine is being blocked by Republicans who argue more money should go to domestic security at the U.S. border with Mexico.
It's very important that by the end of this year, we can send very strong signal of our unity to the aggressor and the unity of Ukraine, America, Europe, the entire free world.
Jackson Proskow explains why the stakes are so high for Ukraine.
Back to the White House.
On his third visit to Washington as a wartime leader, Ukraine's president is increasingly desperate and running out of options.
And people need to be confident that freedom is secure and strong enough to win.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy's appeal for billions of dollars in U.S. aid comes at a critical time. Ukraine's counteroffensive is stalled and Russia is rearming. Existing U.S. aid will run out by the end of the year. Zelenskyy warns Ukraine could lose its fight for survival.
The decisions we make now are going to determine the future for decades to come.
Meeting with members of Congress, Zelenskyy outlined the stakes and Ukraine's military needs.
But if he gets the help, he can win this war.
President Joe Biden has asked lawmakers to provide a $100 billion aid package. $60 billion is for Ukraine, with the rest for Israel and for U.S. border security. Republicans are blocking it.
What the Biden administration seems to be asking for is billions of additional dollars with no appropriate oversight, no clear strategy to win.
Conservative lawmakers say they want to focus on the southern border first, as polls show the American public becoming wary of sending more to Ukraine.
If the United States does not come through on this, I mean, that will certainly, send a very bad signal regarding American leadership.
With time running out, Zelenskyy's visit was orchestrated as a last-minute push, just days before lawmakers break for the holidays.
Before they give Putin the greatest Christmas gift they could possibly give him.
Time is no longer on Ukraine's side. It can only hope the U.S. still is. Republicans are signaling they're unlikely to approve more aid until sometime in January. At the White House, Zelenskyy was given a small lifeline, another $200 million diverted by President Biden from a special emergency fund. Of course, that's just a small fraction of the billions Ukraine says it needs to win the war. Donna?
Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. At the UN climate conference in Dubai, delegates are working through the night. The big dispute is over 4 words in the final agreement, a commitment to phase out fossil fuels. Many countries, including Canada, say that promise is essential if climate targets are going to be met.
And let's deliver.
Activists and young people at the COP28 summit have been piling on the pressure. This 12-year-old barged onto the stage with her message, end fossil fuels, save our planet and our future. The original draft agreement did not include any mention of phasing out fossil fuels, and negotiations on a final agreement are stretching into the night. Redmond Shannon is following developments for us.
Dismay from climate action campaigners as COP28 winds down in oil and gas-rich Dubai. Their fury focused on a draft agreement text that did not mention phasing out the use of fossil fuels, even though most expected it to feature for the very first time in COP summit history.
The draft text that came out yesterday is unacceptable. It's not backed by science.
Climate experts say phasing out fossil fuels is fundamental to controlling global warming. Also on Tuesday, this summit of Arab energy ministers in nearby Qatar, where they agreed that fossil fuels will be, quote, pillars of global energy for many decades to come.
It's important that we think about how we get that balance. There are those who want phase out, there are those who want phase down, there are those who want different formulations.
Any final agreement needs all 198 nations to sign off on dozens of contentious agenda items, none more so than the phase-out text. Canada's Environment Minister among those pushing for its inclusion during Tuesday's marathon of meetings.
We cannot let this moment slip away, and we cannot afford to backtrack.
When a final text is agreed upon, nations will have just a few hours to read it through before a vote. Organisers can then start thinking about next year's COP summit, hosted by another oil and gas-rich nation, Azerbaijan. Donna?
Redmond Shannon, thanks. A little later, I speak with the chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy, Canadian Catherine Hayhoe, about whether these COP meetings actually matter and what she thinks has been accomplished. We're learning more about the new murder charges an Ontario man is facing in connection with 14 deaths in that province. Police allege Kenneth Law ran several websites that sold so-called suicide kits around the world. Eric Sorensen reports on the allegations and the complex case.
Allegations of counseling or aiding suicides against Kenneth Law are now in the realm of mass murder. Police say the 57-year-old who lived in this Mississauga home operated websites to sell a substance that it's believed people used to end their lives.
It's clearly a significant charge to be laying this many, and that's not taken lightly by the investigative team.
14 second-degree murder charges involves 11 Ontario police forces in communities from the Greater Toronto Area to Windsor to Thunder Bay. The victims are male and female, ranging in age from 16 to 36. More than one was under 18, and all were residents of Ontario.
We will not be naming the names of the victims at this time.
How come? The names of alleged murder victims are normally made public, but police are holding back on that and on a possible motive.
Evidence has come in that supports the charge of second-degree murder. I can't speak to that evidence at this time to preserve the investigation.
I think there's never been any doubt in my mind that the man is a murderer.
David Parfet applauds the Ontario charges. His 22-year-old son Tom died by suicide in the UK. His case came to light after an investigation by The Times. Parfet believes Law coached his son to take his life.
He used that forum. He drummed up custom by being part of a community that preys on vulnerable people and seems to get some form of perverse pleasure from those people harming themselves.
Police say Law shipped 160 packages of sodium nitrite and other items to be used for self-harm across this country. If there's evidence he also encouraged people to harm themselves, that could bolster the case for murder, says this legal expert.
If they have these communications and it's clear that Mr. Law was communicating and trying to influence or convince people who were maybe thinking about it, that may be compelling evidence to establish he knew that by shipping this chemical to them, they would use it and therefore die.
Police allege that Law shipped more than 1,200 packages to some 40 countries and say they're working very closely with law enforcement around the world on this case. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
If you or someone you know needs help, you can call or text 988, Canada's new suicide crisis helpline. The service is available in both English and French 24 hours a day, every day. A coroner's inquest into a death in an Ontario jail in 2016 has deemed it a homicide. Soliman Fakiri had been shackled, pepper sprayed, and covered with a spit hood face down on his cell floor. The 30-year-old was accused of stabbing a neighbor in what his family says was a psychotic episode. He had a combination of schizophrenic and bipolar symptoms and was awaiting medical evaluation. No charges have been laid in his death. There were terrifying moments in a New York neighborhood. Coming up, the partial collapse of a century-old apartment building. There was concern people may have been trapped when the 7-story apartment building in the Bronx partially collapsed. Firefighters in New York say no bodies have been found. 2 people have been treated for minor injuries. Repairs were underway on the outside of the building when it began crumbling last night, and the cause of the collapse is still under investigation. In Spain, police are calling a massive seizure of cocaine a major blow to Europe's most powerful distribution networks. 11,000 kilos of cocaine from South America was confiscated in 2 separate police stings. The drugs were hidden between pieces of frozen tuna and in false bottoms of shipping containers. 20 people linked to 2 criminal organizations from the Balkans have been arrested. Still ahead, the takeaways from COP28 as countries feud over the fate of fossil fuels.
We cannot wait for speeches when the sea is rising around us all the time. Climate mobility must come to the forefront.
That is the foreign minister of Tuvalu 2 years ago, standing in the oceans, addressing the COP26 conference. For years, Pacific Island nations like his have been sounding the alarm about climate change and rising sea levels. They are living with the consequences. Well, today at the COP28 meeting in Dubai, they are exhausted. Oil-producing countries who profit from the fossil fuel industry carry so much weight, it feels like a battleground over the planet's future.
We're feeling the weight not just of the negotiations, but of everything that is taken to come up to this point, because it's not just about what happens here, it's about all of the meetings that we've been to before this, it's about the intersessionals, it's about the working group. We've already fed so much into only to come to the negotiations and be blocked, so it's tiring and it's exhausting and it's disappointing.
Well, with me now is Professor Katherine Hayhoe. She is an atmospheric scientist and chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy. Professor, thanks for being here. Fossil fuels, we know, are the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. So when you see all of this arguing at the COP meeting about the words phase out fossil fuels, where does it leave you?
Well, what a lot of people don't realize is that just 2 or 3 years ago, the word fossil fuels had never even been used in the United Nations climate negotiations. So the fact that there is so much pressure to not only include the word, but specifically phasing out coal, oil, and gas, this may surprise you, but it represents tremendous progress and growing global awareness that we need to act now.
Well, I know you are an optimist, which is wonderful. You know, about 80,000 people are registered for the COP28 conference. Business executives apparently outnumber the country delegates. And the COP28 president is also chair of the UAE state-owned oil company. It is hard not to look at all that and wonder what is the point of these meetings.
Oh, yes, I completely agree. What I'm encouraged by is the fact that these climate action meetings are now happening much more at the local scale. So there was an Africa Climate Summit, a Latin America Climate Summit, Climate Week in New York City. There are all kinds of summits and organizations and conferences and meetings happening below the global scale where people are really getting things done. And that's the way it needs to be. We can't do this alone, but I know that we can do it together. And that means every single one of us has a role to play.
And I know that you think there are some positives that came out of this COP meeting. Can you give us some of them?
Yes, there absolutely are. So the biggest benefit to these meetings, in my opinion, is that it offers people a chance to get together and talk and share and learn and grow and collaborate together. So, for example, coming out of this meeting, we saw multiple countries, including Colombia, join the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. We saw big announcements on investment in ocean solutions, sustainable agriculture, and reducing agricultural emissions. We saw a loss and damage fund for the most vulnerable countries in the world finalized. And of course, we announced as a country our cap on oil and gas emissions, which is an essential part of bringing our own national budget in line with the Paris targets.
You know, the next COP meeting is going to be in Azerbaijan next year, a country whose main source of revenue is oil and gas. What's up with that?
Well, what I heard is that because the United Nations negotiations have to be unanimous, that when one country says we don't agree, that means they have to keep going until they find something they can agree on. And Russia did not want to hold this conference, is what I heard, in any country that opposed the war on Ukraine. I feel like holding these in remote locations that are oil and gas strongholds is not the right message to be sending. It is not productive. We need to be looking at action. And personally, if I was in charge of making the decision, I would pick the host country based on how much they had accomplished so they could show off what they were doing and help encourage more change in other countries.
Well, that seems sensible, as you always are. Professor Katherine Hayhoe, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Next, the growing pressure on Canada to sanction people with ties to Hamas. The agony of families whose loved ones are still being held hostage in Gaza never eases. Every day they plead for their release, and now some have come to Ottawa. They joined a coalition of human rights groups and MPs asking the federal government to sanction dozens of people with ties to Hamas. Abigail Beeman spoke with one family about what they are enduring.
Nimrod is my twin brother, but he's also my best friend.
Nimrod is a normal child like every other child in the world.
Nimrod Cohen is just 19 years old, kidnapped by Hamas October 7th. His family has no idea if he's okay or even alive.
When you know your loved one is dead, as cruel as it sounds, you know it's the end. We don't know if it's the end or not. And when the day comes and we will return, if we will return, that's a big question. In what condition, physically and psychologically, we will return? Could I have my boy back as a normal boy? It's a question that drills in your mind.
Romy and Yehuda Cohen are in Ottawa, and along with human rights groups are calling on the Canadian government to do more.
Magnitsky sanctions, whereby we join our allies in targeting the perpetrators.
Former Justice Minister Irwin Cotler is calling on Ottawa to sanction architects of the October 7th massacre and list Iran's Revolutionary Guard as terrorists.
We forget that it is the Iranian leadership that has armed and trained and financed and incentivized and even celebrated these mass atrocities.
While they worry about the conditions and torture Nimrod may face, the Cohens say Hamas is inflicting psychological torture on hostage families, their lives broken.
We hope that by telling our personal stories, people will connect and feel us, because watching it on TV, maybe at the beginning, and now it's more than 2 months in, you see it, you feel bad, and you keep on. And we want people to remember this. This is our message. They are, maybe, I hope, still alive, and we can fight for them.
Never ends.
Since October 7th, it's been 67 days. For Romy, it just feels like one that never ends. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is this beautiful view of Ottawa. That's the Chateau Laurier on the right. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.